Tristan has been captured, and the whole pack is rudderless, in urgent need of a new leader. But at this critical moment, who would have expected the long-lost Bridget to suddenly appear? Her pale face and resolute gaze making one wonder what she has been through, and how she will lead the pack through this difficult time. When I got out of the shower, I found a fresh set of clothes laid out on the bed. Tristan had probably had someone leave them here. It was a pair of jeans and a stylish white blouse. Probably 𝐿𝐴's choosing. I got dressed. There wasn't much I could do about my hair. It had been a crazy past few days and I had neglected sleeping with a satin scarf on or at least braiding it down. I bunched it all up and tied it up, determined to sort it out when I got back to the safe house. I left the guest room and immediately felt lost in the Melrose Manor. I had been here a handful of times, but still, the magnificence of the place always got to me. It was the same guest room I had been given before, so I easily found my way to Tristan's room. I knocked lightly on the door. I didn't need a response to know Tristan was in there. I could feel him. The door swung open and Jasmine came into view. "Oh, hello there," she greeted with a somewhat mischievous smile. "Hi," I responded. The last time I had seen Jasmine was when Tristan was mad at the both of us for going against him. I guess that wasn't a thing anymore. Tristan spoke. Jasmine stood aside and let me walk in. Peter sat at a computer at Tristan's desk. Tristan was in another corner talking on his phone, looking frustrated and concentrating with wrinkles forming on his forehead. "Boss man is just finalizing a few things. He'll be right with you." Jasmine spoke breezily before she walked over to stand behind Peter, who only looked up briefly to give me a nod of acknowledgement. I felt out of place and completely useless. Everyone seemed to be working tirelessly to prevent this war, and me, the Luna, I had no idea what my place even was in all this other than being a distraction to Tristan. I heard Tristan let out a sigh as he got off his phone. He ran a hand down his face. "Mary wants accounts on my prisoners. She says we can't keep them locked up without letting the justice system have a go at them too," he announced. "Well, we've got nothing from them yet." Jasmine spoke. "Yeah, and we need a report to present to the W meeting tomorrow." Perked up. "The union is meeting?" I asked. They all turned to look at me as if just realizing I was there. "I'm gonna take Crystal home and meet you guys at HQ in a bit," Tristan told them. "Pete, stall with justice for me. I need at least 48 more hours and get Captain Park down in the cells as soon as possible. We're getting desperate." "Got it. Probably gonna piss off a lot of them though." Peter spoke as he got up and started gathering the stuff on the table. "When are they never mad?" Jasmine spoke with a roll of her eyes and a playful smile. "Bridge wouldn't have had a problem bossing the oldies around." "Yeah." Peter spoke with a tired laugh. I looked at Tristan and he was quiet, his face straight. I could tell Peter and Jasmine noticed the change in the room as well. Jasmine turned and looked at me. She gave me a raised brow look and then nodded at Tristan. "Oh wait, was I supposed to? Right, of course I'm his mate." I could practically feel the sadness coursing through him. "We'll see you later, T," Peter announced as he and Jasmine walked out the room. Tristan turned to look at me, his business face on. "You ready?" he asked me monotonously. I walked up to him, watching to see if he wanted me close by. When he didn't shift, I took his hands in mine. "Do you want to talk about her?" Tristan was quiet for a long time. Bridget and I weren't close to being friends, but her and Tristan were. They were best friends. She was his confidant, his partner. He was used to being with her all the time, and now she just wasn't here. I honestly wondered if Tristan had even taken the time to process that with all that was going on. In a twisted way, him losing Bridget, a constant in his life, was the same as how I had lost Roman. So to some extent I could understand the gap he probably felt in his heart right now. "Not really." He spoke, pulling one hand away from mine and caressing my cheek. He dropped his hands too soon and walked away. "I gotta get you home so that I can get back to work. Are you ready?" he asked. He was clearly avoiding talking about his feelings, and even if I knew how unhealthy that was, I wasn't willing to push him. "Yeah. You don't have to escort me home. You could just ask someone to do it." Tristan emerged from his closet now in a pair of black combat boots. "I don't trust just anyone with you." He spoke as if that should have been obvious. I looked at Tristan's desk and saw all the scrolls of paper scattered around. There was a board up with various slips and notes pinned on. "You really have been busy," I spoke. My childishness seemed all the more apparent to me. I had my own agendas in wanting to keep an eye on Roman, but in that I was constantly posing a distraction to Tristan, who was doing important work. Yeah, well, I doubt 𝐿𝐤𝐬𝐬 is getting any sleep either. I looked at Tristan's exhausted face. For all we knew, this was one of 𝐿𝐤𝐬𝐬's tactics to get into his head. Psychological warfare. Well, if it was definitely working. Tristan's phone rang. He picked it up and frowned. He looked up at me. "Could you give me a sec?" I nodded. "I'll wait outside." I turned to leave the room, figuring I could wait for him downstairs, maybe talk to Anita and ask about Lady Melrose, who I hadn't seen in a while. Well, that came as no surprise. With everything that had been happening, and also considering the last time I had seen her, she had found out that Tristan and I had been faking our entire relationship. She has genuinely took me in and cared for me. I could only imagine how betrayed she must have felt. She wouldn't be the first Melrose to shun me. Speaking of, I paused outside a wide-open door in the hallway. I didn't mean to pry, but I couldn't help it once I saw it. The folder. The black folder that Captain Park had once showed me. The letters in bold on top of it. ROMAN. The black folder sat on a neatly made bed. Without thinking too much of it, I pushed the door open and walked in. It didn't occur to me to pay attention to anything else in the bedroom except that folder. I walked up to it slowly, like it was calling out to me. I was just about to reach out for it when I heard the floor creak behind me. I jumped and spun around, seeing Mikey standing there. He looked at me and then the folder and then me again. "It isn't what it looks like," he blurted out. I opened my mouth to say something but never got the chance to. "Crystal." Tristan's voice came from down the hall. Crap. Mikey pretty much dived towards his bed, knocking the folder onto the floor just as Tristan stepped in. Mikey struck a pose on the bed in an attempt to be overly casual. "There you are." Tristan looked at Mikey and seemed confused. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Oh, just chilling." Mikey spoke, forcing a smile at his big brother. Tristan furrowed his brows, but if he had questions, he decided not to ask. His attention shifted to me. "Hey, I'm sorry, but something came up. I have to go." He sounded panicked. Or as panicked as he was allowing us to see. Mikey sat up. "What's wrong?" Tristan looked at him and I thought I saw sadness cross his features. "I just need to take care of something quickly." He turned to me. "You'll have to stay here a bit longer. I'll let your uncle and aunt know where you are, but just stay out for now." I frowned and stepped forward. "Tristan, what's going on?" Tristan didn't say anything. He simply stepped forward and placed a kiss on my forehead. "I'll be back as soon as I can." He started backing away. "Mikey, you and Josh look out for each other, and Anita." Mikey rose, seeming confused as Tristan turned and rushed out. I spun on Michael. "What's going on?" I asked in concern. Michael pursed his lips, staring at the now empty doorway in concern. "I don't know. But it can't be good. Should we start with the folder? And why you have it?" I asked. Michael was walking down the hall quickly while I followed, trying to keep up. "I just like brushing up on my facts." Michael called back. I scoffed. "A more believable lie, please. Will you just drop it?" he asked in exasperation. "No," I yelled. It was one thing for him and Joshua to go through my folder without my knowledge. Now they were going through Roman's. Something was up. "Tell me or I'll tell Tristan," I blurted out. Michael stopped and I bumped into him. He turned around and sighed. "Why'd you gotta play that card?" I folded my arms across my chest, trying to seem tough, but the truth was I was anything but that. And blackmail really wasn't my game. Michael sighed. "Look, I have the folder for research purposes." "Research? You mean like how you and Joshua researched me?" "Come on, Mikey, I'm not stupid. You looked into my file when you suspected I was working with Roman. Now you have his, and he's a prisoner here, so there's obviously weight." "Roman has been captured?" Mikey asked. I immediately shut up. "Wait, did he not know that?" "No." I spoke quickly. If Tristan didn't even tell his own brothers about Roman, then it was probably meant to be a secret. Damn it. Some Luna I was. Giving out secrets just like this. "Did you see him?" Michael pressed. "What has he said?" I wanted to fix this desperately. If Tristan didn't trust me with information before, he definitely wouldn't now. "Hey, what's going on?" Joshua showed up and one of my biggest not fans behind him. Michael turned around. "Roman's been captured." Crystal saw it. He spoke, sounding almost excited. Bea turned and narrowed her eyes at me. Now we don't have to waste time with dead ends in that folder. You told her about the folder? Joshua asked, sounding upset. No. She found it. Michael spoke defensively. How did she find it? I told you to hide it. He hissed at his brother. Maybe my hiding spot wasn't the best, but you're not listening. Crystal knows stuff. She can help us with tracking the mole. Wait. I didn't say that. And hold up. Did he say the mole? You guys have been trying to find the mole? I asked. No. Joshua spoke bluntly. Michael turned around. Yes. Mikey. Joshua hissed, but Michael stepped forward. We have. We've been scheming footage we could find, looking at every possible suspect, trying to peek through Tristan's files when he isn't looking because we think finding the mole will put us at least 10 steps ahead of 𝐊𝐼𝐧. That's it. Bea spoke, pulling Mikey back by his shoulder. Last time you'll ever be included in a secret mission. Mikey looked at Bea and Joshua. Come on. She obviously has insight, and who better to help than her? She can't be trusted. Bea yelled. I hated that they were discussing me right in my presence. Hey, all I want to do is help Tristan as well, and he's sidelining me just like he is you guys. Joshua let out a humorless laugh. Oh, now you want to help my brother. He stepped forward. Tell me, Crystal, where were you when you got his men killed and he was in a bad place? We begged you to help then and you weren't there. And now you think you can just show up and we'll trust you not to hurt him again. I would never. But you did. Joshua spat. He clenched his fists and stiffened. I once told you that I knew you couldn't really hurt Tristan because that would mean hurting yourself too. But I take that back. You're sadistic and selfish and you do not deserve my brother. At all. His words felt like shards of glass had cut into my skin. I didn't get in many fights or confrontations. And when I did, I usually had Kat or Roman by my side. Going through this journey, I had learned that people weren't always going to be there to fight my battles. Not my aunt or uncle, not Roman, not Tristan. That's why I didn't allow Joshua to turn around and leave. I'm sorry. I spoke in a small voice. Joshua looked down at me, his nostrils flaring. You're right. I hugged myself as I said this. Tristan went above and beyond for me. He risked his life and put his neck on the line for me, and I disappointed him more times than I would like to admit. From lying to him to not trusting that he had my best interests in mind. But that doesn't mean I don't love him. I do. And it took me way too long to realize that. Listen, Joshua, you don't have to trust me. But you can trust this. I love your brother, and at this point, I'm willing to do anything to keep him safe. From your family. This time it was Bea who spoke. She also stepped forward. Because those are our enemies, Valencia Van Cliff. The use of that name unsettled me. But I knew this is what she wanted. A reaction. I'm aware of who the enemies are. I spoke. Bea looked at me, head to toe as if she were unimpressed. Bea turned to Joshua. I don't trust her. But Mikey is right. If we're going to find the mole, she could have some insight. If not, Bea turned to me, we get to prove to Tristan that we were right about her this whole time. It felt like she was keeping me in a chokehold with hold. She was staring. I tried not to let her intimidate me. Fine. Joshua spoke gruffly. Let's show her what we have so far. 𝐊𝐼𝐧. My palms were sweaty, my heart was racing, my mind was in overdrive. I looked around at all the guards standing outside the station. They were all here for me and I knew it. But it just didn't make sense. I hadn't even done anything wrong. Neither had Roman. This must have been a huge misunderstanding. They weren't letting me see Uncle Victor. But I could hear him outside arguing with literally everyone, and anyone who had played a role in taking me out of our home, and basically dragging me here. I wiped my hands on my jeans for the 5th time since I had entered the office. I kept looking at the door. Waiting. Ro would walk in any minute now. They would see that this had all been some huge misunderstanding. He hadn't stolen anything like they had said. Those files they spoke of must have just been misplaced. Everything was okay. Roman wasn't a traitor. He wasn't a spy. He wasn't any of the things these people had been calling him. It was all so ridiculous. I think I would have noticed if I was dating a spy. The door swung open and I sighed in relief when I saw my uncle walk in, Captain Park behind him. I rose and embraced Uncle Victor. What's going on? I asked, my voice shaky. Everyone here was treating me like I had killed someone or committed some atrocious crime. Everything will be okay, baby. He spoke, whispering into my ear. He then pulled away and his eyes focused on Captain Park, who had walked around and was standing behind her desk now. I can't believe you're treating a kid this way. Crystal will be a legal adult soon, Mr. Benson. And if you think the Silvercrest Pact takes matters of treason lightly, you're greatly mistaken. Uncle Victor narrowed his eyes at Captain Park. I didn't commit treason. I sputtered out. Captain Park zeroed in on me as if just remembering I was there. Then you won't mind answering a few questions. I looked at Uncle Victor. I didn't do anything wrong. I spoke. If they wanted me to answer a few questions, I could do that. I know, but... He looked at Captain Park. I need someone here to defend you, so that they don't use your words against you. Roman didn't do anything either. I spoke up. He could have. Uncle Victor frowned, putting an arm on my shoulder. Defending Mr. Desiree isn't doing you any favors, Miss Swan. Captain Park spoke. You're accusing him of breaking into the Alpha's premises and stealing top-secret information. I told her. Do you even have proof? I knew I shouldn't have been questioning such a high-ranking official, but I couldn't help it. I was so worked up, scared, and confused. Captain Park leaned over, placing her foot on the table and raising her pants. There was a deep scratch there which explained her slight limp when she had entered. I grimaced at it. I was there. She spoke. My hand flew to my mouth. No. Roman wouldn't. The Alpha is here. One of the guards announced to Captain Park. Next thing I knew, Tristan was walking in, Bridget behind him. His face looked like it meant business. He walked around to his desk, not making eye contact with anyone. Not even me. Leave us, he ordered. Captain Park looked at him, her eyes narrowed. Excuse me, Alpha, but I'm taking over the questioning. He spoke, sitting down in his chair. And I suppose you think it's fitting to break protocol. Yes, I do. I am the Alpha. He spoke, his voice carrying authority. Captain Park looked insulted. Now leave, all of you. His eyes landed on Uncle Victor, who stubbornly stood behind me. Bridget placed her hand on his shoulder. You can't do this. Crystal's a minor. She needs. Tristan rose, slamming his hands on the desk. I don't owe you any explanation. He growled. Someone has betrayed me and my pack, and I won't stop until I find out who's responsible. I felt myself start to shake in fear. I'll escort you out, Bridget told Uncle Victor. It wasn't a question. I'll be outside, baby. Uncle Victor reassured me. He gave Tristan one last angry look before leaving with Bridget. Captain Park did the same, not turning around to say anything more or do anything else. But her eyes did find mine, and I spotted an intense dislike. When the door closed, I looked at Tristan. I had never seen him like this, and I was frightened. What would he do to me? Tristan's head slowly rose to meet mine. I'm only going to ask you this once, Crystal. He seemed to be fighting to control his rage. And don't lie to me, because I'll know if you're lying. I placed my hand on my other arm, feeling the chills again and my blood run cold. Did you have any idea about what Roman was doing? Wow. I spoke as I looked around the Melrose basement. Josh and Mikey had definitely been busy. There were tables all around, boards set out with various photos and notes pinned up, sort of like the one Tristan had, but not nearly as organized. There were folders strewn around all over. I stopped at one. It had the name Kimberly's son on it. I turned to look at Mikey. Kim. Michael walked forward, taking the folder from me. We've been looking into everyone. And by everyone I mean everyone. And the people who were in the AAP with Roman felt like a good start. I thought about Kim and the major encounters I had had with her. They hadn't been many. I remember her not knowing Roman and I were dating and how upset he had seemed by it. I remember her at the AAP ball trying to score a dance with him. And she had also been one of his first partners in the program. But I couldn't see the peppy, popular cheerleader being a mole. But then again, I knew not to judge a book by its cover by now. So what do you have so far? I asked, turning to look at the twins and B. Joshua stepped forward towards one of the boards. As Mikey said, we started off with the people Roman spent the most time with. I walked up to the board. Right there at the top was a picture of me. Immediately below, Kat and Chris followed. I turned to look at Josh. Really? B came up beside him. If there's anything the AAP taught us, it's not to leave a stone unturned. She smirked. I turned away, ignoring her comment. I looked back at the board. Surely all the people Roman had been in AAP with were on the board. Sal and Millie as well. Roman's foster parents were barely even part of his life. I told them. When the entire investigation started, they hadn't even shown up except when they were supposed to. And they had no problem bad-mouthing Roman to everyone. Yet, Josh spoke staring at the photos. We ruled them out as well. They had no real motive and they don't exactly fit the bill. They're sketchy, but they're not smart enough to be the moles. B spoke bluntly. So who are the prime suspects? I asked curiously. B smirked at me. You mean other than yourself? I narrowed my eyes at her. Joshua came in between us as if blocking us from each other's view would help keep the peace. So here's the thing. He begun explaining. Whoever was the mole must have been someone who knew Roman. They didn't have to interact with him publicly, but they had to be around him enough. And they had to be someone with enough power to get Roman in and out of 𝐿𝐴𝐺 territory without raising any red flags. Josh added. I stared at the board looking at the suspects. We were all people who had thought we had known him. We were the people he spent the most time with. In fact, if you asked anyone on this board who Roman spent the most time with, we'd all point at each other. They had to be a part of his life somehow. I muttered. There's something very biased about this list. Oh, here she goes. B spoke, rolling her eyes. No. I spoke, pointing at it. Don't you realize that everyone on this list are people Roman interacted with publicly? People he wanted to be seen with? Joshua looked at the photos with a sort of renewed concentration. He controlled the narrative with all these people. Exactly. I spoke, excited that someone was getting it. If I was the mole, helping Roman with getting in and out of 𝐿𝐴𝐺 and feeding him intel, of course I wouldn't want to be known as a public known acquaintance of his. I'd have to be someone no one would even consider. Someone no one would have their eyes on. During the trials and investigations I was watched 24/7. That alone ruled me out of any foul play. They were always watching me. You have a point. Mikey spoke. We've been trying to assimilate data from what we already knew about Roman when he got caught. But what if we're missing the bigger picture? What if the mole only became operational when this all started? So we would have to look at the very first attack. B spoke as she spun around and walked towards the table, picking up a folder and opening it. We all followed her. She had what looked like a report from that day. I didn't even want to know how they had gotten their hands on this. The wolf that attacked Josh was obviously Shadowpack. I looked at the description, dark coat, brown eyes. It definitely fit the description. Are there any records of where it could have come in from? I asked. No. Josh spoke. I stared at the report. It was written that I was the one with him when it happened and then the others had found us. Wait a minute. I spoke. What about the second attack? Do you have the report on that one? I could only steal one at the time without anyone noticing. Mikey spoke. It didn't matter anyway. We had 4 witnesses standing right here. Remember how 𝐿𝐴𝐺 taught us that when looking for suspects, more often than not you have to search for the common denominators. Joshua looked at me as if wondering where I was going with this. Think about it. I told them. The first attack. Who found us first? I turned to Josh with this question. He furrowed his brows. B. Courtney Allison, who was leading them. I clarified. Instructor Raphael. B spoke in a smaller voice. Why was he so close to the scene in the first place? I asked. His response time had been quick. Too quick. He's our instructor. He's supposed to be close by. Joshua spoke defensively. Close enough to rescue us but not to hear the Alpha's little brother getting attacked. I asked. This shut Joshua up. He pursed his lips, still not looking happy with my conclusion. Okay. What about the second attack? I asked. Unless those wolves knew my scent, they wouldn't have known which car I was in. Raphael's was in front of us, yet we got the brunt of it all. Joshua was quiet. He looked thoughtful. They came after us after Instructor Raphael left his vehicle. B spoke. They hardly even touched him. Mikey muttered. Joshua slammed his hand on the desk. You're all being ridiculous. Raphael fought alongside Tristan in the war. He looked out for him. He looked out for us. Why would he do all that only to turn against us now? War changes people. B spoke in a low voice. My dad came back half the man he was. Your dad came back a drunk who hated humans and halflings. Josh snapped. Raphael came back a hero. B clenched her jaw. It was clear she was upset now. Josh's face softened. B, B didn't even listen to anything he said before spinning around and leaving. Joshua looked like he was about to go after her, but Mikey stopped him. Hey, we still need to figure this out. He spoke gently. Joshua huffed before walking over to another table. It's not him. Let's find another damn suspect. He spoke as he started sorting through papers aggressively. Mikey sighed. He closed the report. Ralph's been there for all of us since we were kids. Just wouldn't make sense for it to be him. Michael explained calmly. I nodded even though I didn't completely agree. I had two people who had been there for me betray my trust so far. I had learned the hard way that sometimes the people closest to you could be the villains the entire time. But I didn't want to push. I had obviously struck a nerve in the twins. If they didn't believe it was Raphael, I would give them the benefit of the doubt. But that didn't mean I was completely ruling him out. Raphael had clearly disliked me from day one. That alone seemed like a pretty good cover. We continued skimming through all the info the twins had. I didn't share anything about Maggie. Honestly, even just thinking of my one encounter with her put me in a state of unease. I couldn't even imagine the things she must have gone through to have gotten her in that state. I thought of what she had told me. How she had called me selfish for turning my back on my people. But that's the thing, I didn't even know these people. We had been going through notes and scenarios for what felt like hours before I decided to take a break. I walked up to the kitchen wanting some water. I was shocked to find B seated there. Honestly, I had thought by now she would have left. Hey, I greeted quietly. She looked up, a scowl on her face as if me greeting her was an insult. I shook my head out of it. I wasn't here to start an argument with her. I needed to help Mikey and Josh figure out who the mole was so that we could help Tristan. You ruin everything, you know. I heard her speak. Everywhere you go, chaos follows. I froze at the sink. Her words struck me in a way I hadn't been expecting. Without thinking, I spun around. What's your problem with me anyway? I asked. B got up from where she had been sitting behind the island, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Yeah, well, I had to. I wasn't shy and scared little Crystal anymore. Where do you want me to start? She asked with a sneer. I slammed the cup on the island, walking closer to her. I have never done anything wrong to you. B scoffed and rolled her eyes. Course you haven't. No, I haven't. I spoke more firmly. You and Courtney have hated me since day one. And why? Because you thought I was a halfling. That's a really crappy reason to not like someone. Because they're different. Well, now you know I'm not a halfling. I'm a fully fledged wolf just like you. Just like Courtney. So please enlighten me on the new reason you hate me. B balled her hands into fists and I could see her fighting her anger. I was on guard as well, willing to let my wolf come out if it came to that. I have never done anything wrong to you. And you hated me anyway. I repeated. I just want to know why you're so bitter. I then remembered something. What Joshua had said down in the basement about B's father. It's about your dad, isn't it? Mentioning her father just seemed to make her more mad. I sighed. What happened to your father that made you hate humans so much? My voice was softer now. Because to be honest, I didn't want to hold on to hate like B seemed to have done with me. I didn't want to hurt someone else because of it. I'm not going to stand here and be disrespected by the likes of you. I don't owe you an explanation. B spat at me. Her words triggered something in me. B wait. I called before she could leave. I stared at her, my eyes wide. I know who the mole is. LVI. Tristan, what happened? I growled as I walked into the prison hallway. I looked around at the chaos. Some of my men were down. There was blood splattered on the floor. I sucked in a deep breath, trying hard not to think about where or who it had come from. How did this happen? I demanded. Peter left my side to rush to the computer, typing furiously. Looks like the security footage was deleted. He announced. Nia walked up to me. A limp in her step and her shirt was torn on the sleeve. Captain Park was beside her, holding her up. Alpha. She spoke. I'm sorry. She spoke up. I saw her wince in pain, but I refused to show any emotion. What's the damage? I demanded. 3 guards injured, 1 dead. I didn't ask who because I didn't need to have an emotional reaction right now. Who was on guard? I yelled. Who let this happen? It was during the shift change, Alpha. It was clearly thought out. This was planned and we were caught. Captain Park narrowed her eyes. With all due respect, Alpha, You're the one who left HQ shortly after a high-risk prisoner was brought in. Where were you? I tried to control my anger. As much as I hated the fact that she was embarrassing me in front of my soldiers, she was right. We had just brought in a high-risk prisoner, and I had chosen to leave and take Crystal to my home. I should have been here. I looked around at the faces around me. All people I had let down. How many escaped? I asked, ignoring Captain Park. All of them, Alpha. Nia reported. All the rogues except Roman Desiree. I stiffened. My hands balled into fists. Of course. Where's Raph? I asked. Leading the hunt. Alpha. Nia spoke. Send more men to help him. I spoke. I want every one of them brought back to me. Yes, Alpha. Nia spoke. She hesitated. Dead or alive? I looked at Captain Park. She simply nodded. By any means necessary. I spoke. This was war now. My people could be in danger. I needed to regain control as soon as possible. I started marching to the one cell I knew was still occupied. Peter called after me. I could hear his footsteps behind me, but I didn't stop. Not even for a second. I punched into the code and walked into the room. He sat with his back against the wall. I looked at him through the glass wall that contained him. Upon hearing me, Roman lifted his head. His eyes had dark circles around them and he looked pale, but he still managed to grin. Well, if it isn't the mighty Alpha Tristan. He let out a cough and then switched to use his other arm to support him, but it still trembled with obvious weakness. What's going on out there? Sounds like a party. My eyes remained fixed on him, my blood was boiling. Turn off the wolfsbane. I ordered. What? Peter spoke from behind me. You heard me. I growled. Peter walked over to the control panel and shut off the vents that had been slowly depositing small, diluted amounts of wolfsbane gas into Roman's cell to weaken him. There's a reason he was in this cell particularly. It was reserved for the worst of the worst. And in my opinion he fit the bill. Open it. I ordered. This time Peter didn't ask any questions and I knew he had plenty. The cell door clicked open and I walked through. I walked up to Roman and he eyed me curiously. I kicked him hard in the stomach. Roman coughed, groaning slightly in pain. Then he chuckled. Kicking a man while he's down. Not very valiant of you, Alpha. I leaned down and grabbed him by his shirt, pulling him up. I brought my face close to his. Cut the crap, Desiree. I growled. Not my name, but okay. I threw my hand back and punched him hard across the face, immediately drawing blood from his nose. Roman winced in pain and kept his eyes shut. Yeah, that was a good one. He muttered. I lifted him by his shirt, bringing him closer. What the hell do you think you're doing? I don't know what you're talking about. Roman answered, his words barely audible. I threw him to the ground hard before kicking him in the face. He let out a groan. You orchestrated that escape. Roman's lip was busted now. Escape. He struggled to speak. Whatever do you mean? I growled. My wolf was this close to coming out. I will maul you to death, Roman. Don't test me. I yelled. Roman weakly pulled himself up. He touched his bloody lip with his fingers before looking at the redness. Now what would Crystal say? I felt my heat race. How dare he use her name? I grabbed him by his shirt again, this time using it to lift him up against the wall. I'm not playing. I spoke, my voice low. Roman looked at something behind me and smiled. I turned and found Peter staring at me, poorly masked disapproval clear on his face. Captain Park was there too, along with Nia and some other guards. Get out. I yelled. Not because I needed privacy, but because I wasn't ready for my people to see the monster I would have to become. Captain Park nodded at everyone else to vacate. She's the only one who remained. She didn't say a word, as if this is the me she had been waiting for. The alpha who got things done when they needed to be done. And at this point I knew it was right. My hand shifted to grip Roman's neck, using that alone to hold him up. I'm only going to ask you this one more time. Who helped you? How did you do this? Roman was gasping for breath, weakly clawing at my arm. In that moment I wondered if I could do it. Just end him here and now. Crystal asked me if I would. At the time I didn't know the answer. Now the animal in me didn't have a doubt in my mind. Tristan. I heard Captain Park's voice. Let him speak. She ordered. I breathed out through my nostrils, looking at Roman, whose eyes were become larger and his struggles weaker. I loosened my hold on him and let him drop to the ground. He coughed out and heaved in deep breaths in and out. I walked away trying to control the tremble in my hand. Would I really have done it? I leaned against the glass, putting some distance between Roman and myself as he tried to catch his breath. He coughed again, you know. What has always been your problem, Tristan Melrose? He looked up, hatred and anger in his bloodshot eyes. You've never known how to listen. He heaved out again. You've always been a shell of a man. Never quite nearly as good as your mother or your grandfather or anyone who has ever wielded the Melrose name. I looked at Roman unmoved, unfazed. He was clearly just grasping now. I must have bruised his ego. You're pathetic, he continued, parading around as an alpha. Pathetic. You've never been nearly good enough for anyone. Not Crystal and definitely not this pack. I scowled at him. Everyone sees you for the pathetic and weak shit you are. You're wasting your breath. I spoke in a level voice. Roman was breathing heavily. Bloodlust rested in his eye, and I had no doubt that if he had full strength we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. The only thing I had let myself forget is that I had always known Roman's weakness. And I knew exactly how to make him spill. Crystal seems to like me just fine, I commented. Roman's features burned with rage. He heaved more heavy breaths. I could see him trembling to get himself up. Why, you're weak. I'm the one who's weak, I asked, looking at the man who could barely lift himself up. Roman shakily brought a hand to wipe the blood on his nose. To my surprise, he still smiled. Crystal deserves a man who won't let her down. I no longer felt comfortable using Crystal as ammunition in this. This wasn't about her. Or him. This was about one person. Where's 𝐿𝐤𝐳? Tell me and I might show you mercy. Roman looked at me again with pure hatred. 𝐿𝐤𝐳 didn't raise me to be weak. I have never feared death. Too bad your parents weren't raised the way I was. Maybe they wouldn't have begged for their lives like a couple of... I walked up to Roman, kicking him again in the stomach. He fell to ground, laughing. There he is. He spoke, his voice hoarse now. The emotional coward. You wouldn't stand a chance against me in a fair fight. I'm not entertaining your bull anymore. If you don't talk, you face the consequences. I knelt down next to him. How did you orchestrate this escape? Where is 𝐿𝐤𝐳? Roman looked up at the ceiling blankly. He smiled. You're a joke. He spoke in a whisper again. And everyone around you sees it. I huffed. This wasn't working. I stood up and turned to tell Captain Park we needed a different strategy. I was shocked to find her already in the cell with me. I'm sorry, Alpha. She spoke. I furrowed my brows. But David is right. She took something out. I realized too late that it was a syringe. You are weak. She came at me with the sharp needle. I dodged her advances in time. My eyes widened. I spoke. Betrayal flooded my mind. It went into overdrive. It couldn't be. Captain Park charged towards me again. This time grabbing me roughly by the neck and pinning me to the wall. About time. I heard Roman mutter. I looked into the eyes that had served my mother. That had watched me grow. That had served me. Now they just seemed empty. How could you? I spat out. Her face remained blank. I'm afraid a new dawn is upon us. And you're not a part of it. She stuck the syringe into my neck, and the next thing I knew, there was darkness. 𝐿𝐤𝐳. I felt like everyone's eyes were on me. Each step I took as we got closer and closer to the building screamed out that something was wrong. I looked around and saw the well-oiled clock I had come to know in shambles. Soldiers were running around, various people yelling orders. There were more soldiers. More of the council members. The more I looked, the more I saw that there were more and more important people present. I felt a sick feeling in the pit of my stomach. Everywhere I looked there were people talking, yelling, but no one paid attention to Joshua, Mike B, or me. That's how I knew something was seriously wrong. Joshua grabbed a soldier who was rushing away by the arm. What's going on? He demanded. The soldier looked bewildered and then ready to snap. But then he seemed to realize who had stopped him and his face softened. The Alpha has been taken. He spoke. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. Mikey let out a small croak sound and stumbled back. B was there to steady and hold him. Joshua was still for some time, so still I thought he had frozen up. Taken by who? Taken where? he suddenly demanded, grabbing the soldier by the shoulders. His grip looked too tight to not hurt. I looked around hoping that the soldier had been mistaken, that Tristan was here somewhere. But even I knew he wasn't. I couldn't feel him. Not even a little bit. I could hear Josh still yelling at the soldier. I spun in circles, my mind on overdrive, the panic slowly setting in. I felt like someone had taken something from me. Stolen from right underneath me. Tristan. I found myself saying his name, calling out to him like that would help. Tristan. Croaked out. I saw Mikey sinking, be struggling to hold him up and calling out for Josh. Crystal. I saw Jasmine's face, her long dark hair pulled back behind her, fully suited up in a different soldier's uniform from the Silvercrest one. She walked up to us. Crystal, Josh, Mikey, you shouldn't be here. She let out. Her eyes were tinged red, but the look she held was one of a leader. It meant business. Where's my brother, Jasmine? Where's my brother? Josh demanded. I stayed in my position. I could picture myself in Joshua's shoes, being as frantic as he was, demanding Tristan's whereabouts, but I just couldn't move. Jasmine let out a breath. Her eyes turned to me, then Mikey. Tell us. I heard Michael speak. I thought I saw Jasmine's eyes become watery. She blinked quickly before clearing her throat. I guess you should come with me. After all, we have a power vacuum now. She spoke. What do you mean by that? Joshua asked. Jasmine fixed her eyes on Joshua and stared long and hard. She then turned to look at me. I'm saying our alpha's gone. And the law states one of you has to take over. The alpha is my mate. The alpha is my mate. It didn't matter how many times I repeated it to myself. None of it seemed to make sense to me. But then why couldn't I get him out of my mind? Why did I keep thinking about him each and every second? Why did I feel the need to memorize every single strand of hair in his head just to run my hands through it and then do it again? Why did I want to get up right now and walk all the way to him? Just so that I could be with him, next to him, beside him. To feel the air that he breathed. What's wrong with Crystal? I suddenly perked up when I heard Hazel speak. I hadn't even noticed her enter the room. She stood in her little yellow tutu and 2 buns by the edge of my bed. Kat, who was sitting on the floor painting her nails black, looked up at home curiously. She then rolled her eyes and turned her attention back to her toes. She's in love, Hayes would not recommend. For a minute I panicked. How did Kat know? How could she have known unless she followed me into the forest? I then relaxed when I realized she hadn't been talking about Tristan but Roman. Hazel climbed into my bed. She sat cross-legged in front of me, a cute smile on her face. Are you Crystal? Are you in love? She asked with the innocence that only an 8-year-old could still truly have. I hesitated, not really knowing how to answer that, but also not wanting to disappoint Hazel. Think so, yeah. Hazel looked elated. Mum says the love of your life would do anything to save you. Like Shane and Mulan. Life's not a fairy tale, Hayes. Kat called out, sounding grumpy. Hazel frowned. I reached forward and tugged on one of her escaped curls. I would totally kick butt to save you. I whispered to her. She brightened up again, looking less like Kat now and more like her father. She leaned in as if to tell me a secret. I would do the same for you. Maybe not Kat. I giggled and she laughed along. Could we please have some order? Jasmine yelled at the grumbling adults. Could we please have someone who's actually from this pack supervising this meeting? Someone shot back. Jasmine looked taken aback by the words. She looked like she was about to snap when Raphael stepped up, putting a hand on her shoulder. The rules call for an impartial witness. He explained, sounding surprisingly calm considering nothing but chaos currently filled the room we sat in. I was one of the 3 people seated on the chair, feeling like I was on trial all over again before the officials in front of me. The only difference was that Mikey was seated right next to me and Joshua stood beside him, a hard look on his face. Mikey, on the other hand, simply looked distraught and tired, his eyes on the ground. Where's you father, girl? A lady I recognized as Mary, the Justice Wing leader, called out. He and all the other alphas and their representatives are on their way. Jasmine spoke back. This time Raphael wasn't quick enough to hold her back. But if any of you feel I'm not as competent as him, then go ahead and leave. She yelled, slamming her hand on a table. An older man scoffed. Fine. Jasmine's mouth hung open, looking offended. We don't need an outsider child telling us what to do. Another man spoke. Excuse me, your alpha is missing, and might I remind you that your chief of security also turned out to be a mole. She yelled angrily. Sounds to me like you need some outsider help. We need someone with experience, not a girl who barely saw blood during the war. Another lady yelled. I saw Jasmine clench her fists. Enough with being led by children, that's what got us into this mess in the first place. The same lady spoke. Without warning, Joshua jumped to his feet looking furious. Are you calling my brother incompetent, Roger? The older man stood up as well, looking like he was ready to take on Joshua. Are you talking to me, boy? He asked. I would be careful if I were you. Joshua continued. You might as well be talking to your new alpha. The man scoffed. Do you want to challenge me, is that it? Joshua continued. The Roger man moved forward quicker than I was expecting. How Peter leaped into action to hold him back was a mystery to me. Meanwhile, Raphael and Mikey had also gotten to their feet, holding Joshua back. Josh. I heard Jasmine hiss, and she stepped up in front of him and gripped his arm. She whispered something in his ear, and I saw him relax. She pushed himself out of Raphael and his brother's hold and went back to leaning against the wall. Michael let out a huff. Listen, everyone. He yelled, a deep growl accompanying it. I was surprised by it, never having heard Michael put that much force behind his voice before. I could tell I wasn't the only one. The room seemed to have been stunned silent. He walked forward and placed his palms against the table. I had been expecting to see a strong and confident man take over, but Mikey just looked exhausted, like he could drop any moment now. My brother has been taken. You're alpha. I thought I heard his voice crack slightly. By the enemy. Mikey stopped, and just for a second I thought he would break down, but to my shock he kept talking. Protocol says we need to select a new alpha before we can make any further decisions. Now, personally, I don't give a damn who the new alpha is going to be as long as they help us find Tristan. So will everyone just act mature for a second so that we can actually move forward? He spoke. He leaned back and let out a hard breath, his nostrils flaring. He then turned around and walked back calmly to slump into his seat. The room was still silent, as if no one knew what to say after that. Then someone spoke. Well, the new alpha definitely won't be the Van Cliff over there. There was so much hate behind his words I felt like I had been slapped directly in the face. The chattering started all over again. Mikey turned to look at me with a frown. He tried to say something to the group, but his voice was drowned out. I gripped my chair and felt my heart pounding. All I wanted to do was cry. All I wanted to do was disappear. Maybe we should evacuate the Luna. I heard Jasmine say to Peter and Raphael in concern. I felt myself sinking. I looked at the door wondering if I could just dart out, but then it swung open. At first I thought my eyes were deceiving me, and I could tell I wasn't the only one. More and more people quietened down until the room was silent when we saw Lady Melrose walk in, ever graceful. But it wasn't her who had caught everyone's attention, it was the person she was assisting. Bridget's blonde hair, usually tied back behind her, was a wild mess on her head. Her face was pale, her eyes dark. Her lips looked so chapped that I wondered when was the last time she had had something to drink. She looked up at all of us, her blue eyes piercing into everyone. She wore a white robe over what looked like pajamas. The hand that wasn't around Lady Melrose for support was at her side, holding on. I know what you're thinking. Her voice was horsey and scratchy. The bitch isn't dead. I blinked twice. With the way she looked, she could have been a ghost. The first person to move was Jasmine as she rushed over to the blonde and wrapped her arms around her, squeezing her in a hug. I saw Bridget flinch, and this made Jasmine let go of her. Peter rushed forward as well. Bridge. He spoke, his voice a whisper as if he couldn't believe it. I found myself rising to my feet. I didn't even realize I had been doing it. Bridget's eyes found me. She didn't say anything. I stood aside and she nodded. She let go of Lady Melrose. Jasmine was quick to take over, leading her to where I was standing. For a minute Bridget just looked at me. Then she gestured for Jasmine to place her in my seat. I watched as she did it. A guilt fresher and newer from what I had been feeling all this time arose the minute I had seen Bridget. She didn't have to say anything this time for me to know that it was all my fault. Someone brought a seat for Lady Melrose, putting it in the corner not too far from where Joshua stood. She sat in it and nodded at me in acknowledgement. The guilt deepened, and I could only imagine what everyone in here must have been thinking, from Lady Melrose to Bridget and probably even Jasmine. I should have been taken. Not Tristan me. But they had him. They had him and I didn't even want my mind to drift to whatever they might have been doing to him. What's the agenda? Bridget asked, looking at Jasmine as if this was a normal and average meeting. As if the whole pack hadn't just been turned around. Jasmine cleared her throat and I could see her fighting her emotions. Probably having to remind herself that someone she had grown up with wasn't in the arms of ruthless murders. That her other friend who everyone had pretty much written off as dead was here now. That she wasn't also just a kid like the rest of us. The Werewolf Act number 27 states that I'm the sudden absence of an alpha. The following may fill the vacuum until proper inheritance might be re-established. His offspring, his Luna, his beta or his immediate sibling. Bridget nodded curtly. She then turned to look at everyone else. I'm taking the mantle. She spoke with finality. Joshua sat up. He looked like he was about to protest, but one look from Bridget shut him up. I knew everyone wanted to say what I was thinking. She could barely walk on her own. She still looked like death. How was she going to be the alpha? But no one spoke. And Bridget didn't ask. She looked around the room. Is that all, or can I get to saving our alpha in this pack? She asked. I stood in awe. The power, the authority. No doubt in her words or face. Why don't we confront the obvious problem before us? The man who had argued with Joshua spoke. His eyes then turned to me in a glare. I felt exposed again, offered for persecution. And it didn't help that the just-appointed judge already hated my guts. I looked at Bridget and I could only imagine how deep her hate went now. She licked her badly cracked lips, her eyes still on mine. And what would the problem be, Roger? She asked slowly. Her voice taunted me and I could only imagine how much she was thinking of finally doing the things she had always wanted to do to me. Make me suffer in the way she had always said I deserved. We can't have a Van Cleef among us. He spoke. A few other murmured in agreement. She's not a Van Cleef. Michael spoke up. At least not where it counts. I wanted to show gratitude to him, but his words might as well have added fuel to the fire. More voice grew and became louder in protest. I flinched. They all wanted my head. And Tristan wasn't here to save me anymore. Enough. Bridget's voice wasn't as loud, but it seemed to carry enough weight. The room quietened down. She leaned back in the chair. Her eyes facing straight ahead. Crystal Swan. She spoke. I looked at her, my senses on alert. I glanced at the door again. Maybe I could make it out before they tore me apart limb from limb. It seems the majority want a witch hunt. She spoke slowly as if savoring each and every word. Speak. I looked at her confused. Speak. She repeated herself. I could tell she didn't intend on doing it again. I looked at everyone again. Lady Melrose sat still, ramrod straight in her posture as she watched me with a straight face. My legs felt like jelly. Peter stood to the side, his arms behind his back. He nodded at me. It was ever so slight, ever so subtle, but I could see the encouragement in it. I stepped forward, hoping I didn't fall. I searched the crowd as if I would find something I had been searching for since I came to Silvercrest. But I had lived here long enough to know that it wasn't here. To know how much I was nothing but an outsider to these people. I swallowed hard. I knew my next words could even mean life or death. Imprisonment or freedom, but there's only one thing I could say right now. I live Tristan. It came out sure, my voice didn't waver, which surprised me considering how frightened I was. I cleared my throat. I love him with every fiber in my body. I continued. No one said a thing. That wasn't enough for them. Their alpha had been taken by my grandfather. My ex-boyfriend. That wasn't enough. The first time Tristan claimed me, I'll admit, it wasn't under true feelings of the bond. I mean, his feelings were true and I hadn't decided who I wanted Tristan to be. But he still protected me. He still loved me just as he loved this pack and all his people. I turned to look at Michael. He looked ready to cry. Like he was really fighting to keep everything in. Tristan has done nothing but fight for all of you. He's done nothing but fight for me, and I know you all see me as an outsider and as the enemy, but I can promise you I'm not. I stand with Tristan. I will do anything to get him back. Even sacrifice myself. Then do it. A voice spoke. Another agreed. Yeah. Let's trade the Van Cleef for our alpha. An uproar of agreement followed. I gulped and stumbled backwards, part of me thinking someone would step forward and grab me any moment now. But I found that I didn't actually care. If I could trade myself for Tristan right now, I would. Without a doubt or second thought. That I was sure of. Silence. Silence. Bridget croaked out. She turned to look at me. No emotion was written on her face. No one is handing in the Luna. She spoke. I immediately begun to hear protests. I said no one is handing in the Luna. She repeated, her voice louder. She looked around, dating someone to question her. Except this time someone did. No offense, Beta. It was the Roger guy again. But if you're going to be alpha, I'm not. Bridget spoke icily. Tristan is. I'm only filling in for him until we get him back, and believe me, I'll have a list of all those who were ready to throw his Luna under the bus prepared for him. She looked around, and for the first time I saw actual fear in everyone's eyes. Bridget gestured for Jasmine to step forward. Jasmine rushed over to help her up. We're putting the pack on lockdown, Bridget announced. The Calhoun Alpha arrives in a couple of hours, I'm told, but still live meetings with the rest of the Union commence now. Look alive, people, they took one of our own. Not just anyone, our Alpha war has officially been declared. Chills ran down my spine at her words. The one thing Tristan had been dreading the most had begun. Jasmine started helping Bridget towards the door. But she stopped and turned to look at me. What are you waiting for, Luna? She asked.